For me, I think I'm going to take the edge with this just because when they played against each other, Kobe Bryant had the edge in the playoffs. He's a better scorer and he's more iconic. I think that's what's going to put me over the edge for this. All
And for
right.
me, I'm just saying that Duncan is. I think Tim Duncan is clears Kobe as far as resume goes and team impact and just consistent greatness. So I think I'm going to be leaning on that today. All right, guys. So, like I said in the beginning here, the intro, um, the best debates are always the ones that have they're very close. There's no clear cut winner as far as on paper, things like that. But I think Duncan is definitely the greater player than Kobe Bryant. I think that's spelled out in the entirety of his career, and honestly, I don't think it's even close especially as far as like a team impact goes. So just from the beginning here, like when you take a look at their resumes, Duncan does have more regular season MVPs, more Finals MVPs. They have the same 15 All NBA selections. Duncan does have the most All Defensive selections in NBA history. Okay. Uh, Also, when you go in, and these are just really the numbers here. They're not even talking about how the team impact spelled out yet. But Tim Duncan is actually top five in blocks, sixth all time in rebounds, 14th in points, and that's just the regular season. And the postseason is where Tim Duncan excelled, and it gets better where he's actually first all time in double doubles, first in blocks, third all time in rebounds, and sixth in points. Kobe's actually only top 10 in points in the regular season and playoffs here. So Duncan actually is only one of four players to be at least top five in multiple major stat categories in the playoffs. The other is Michael Jordan, Kareem, John Stockton. So right away we see that Tim Duncan is in rarefied air there when you're talking statistically and with the resume. It screams top five when you cross all these or when you check all these boxes. And especially when you play with, obviously we use the word longevity, but longevity without consistency and without consistent domination, it's really you just playing for a paycheck. You're not really contributing anything. You're just there. You can see your stats diminish until they're basically non-existent. You become kind of like a Robert Parrish or like a Vince Carter type player where you're ineffective and you're really just playing to have something to do. And with Tim Duncan, that was not the case there. And as we go on here, just a little bit about his impact here. Want to talk about how he really impacted his team from the get-go, and just a little bit about that here. That's how we define greatness, right? Is by team impact and how you lead them from the front. And by that, we know that Tim Duncan is actually almost unmatched. And just like a little preview of before I really get into the impact side of things, and when we talk about what it looks like, then the Spurs before he joined were, especially we look at 2 years before they joined and then 2 to 3 years after they left to really get a glimpse of. We'll talk about that next time.
All right. First off, I just want to address some of the things that you said. Most of the stats that Tim Duncan had for being top 10 in the playoffs are all traditional big man stats, to being the rebounds, the blocks, etc. And even with the points, outside of just a few fantastic players within the top 10, even for scoring across all time, big men generally have more total scoring. Not particularly with the scoring titles, but with that. Also, you're just mentioning stats in respect to, again, just accumulation of stats. They're all totals. So, and then you're talking about his consistency throughout his entire career. When you go and you look at his career, he did drop off significantly at the end of his career. He wasn't even making all-star appearances during that time. And Kobe did lead from the front. He was known for his tenacity, his will to win, and even trying to influence Shaq to do better. So if that's not leading from the front, I'm not sure what that is. And then I just want to say that Kobe Bryant is greater than Tim Duncan, which is defined, or greatness is defined as the ability, quality, eminence, considered above the normal or average. In all of these aspects, Kobe Bryant has more convicted evidence than Tim Duncan as a greater basketball player. due to his dominance over his basketball career, which means to be commanding, controlling, or prevailing over all others. Excuse me. Dominance is the easiest way to distinguish all-time greats against each other due to the variations of roles in this case, because they played each other for the majority of their career. To start, Kobe Bryant had greater ability than Tim Duncan, ability meaning the talent, skill, or proficiency in a particular area. And this is going to be centered around his individual play and statistical output. Both played vastly different positions. So I'm going to focus on scoring because I already mentioned Kobe's going to out-assist Duncan. He's going to out-steal him. He's just not going to out-rebound him or block him. And I'm going to talk about it because they complement the roles that they played the stats. So for career-high single-game records, Kobe Bryant outperformed Tim Duncan with points, 81-53, 81 being the second highest ever scored in an NBA game. Kobe Bryant's top 20 scoring games were all over 50 points. Tim Duncan only scored 50 points once in his career. Kobe's the fourth leading scorer in league history, while Duncan is 17th. Bryant was the first player to have 30,000 points and 6,000 assists. He's one of four players to have 25,000 points, 6,000 rebounds, and 6,000 assists. Kobe scored 50 points 24 times in his career, the third most in league history. He averaged 40 points per month 4 times in his career. Duncan never did that. And then he had significantly more compounded achievements than Duncan, Kobe Bryant. And I'll get into that in a further rounds.
All right. So just to touch on one thing he said there, he said that most of those accumulations were due to big men having an easier or big man stats or whatnot. But interesting, two of the 4 players that actually led were top 5 in multiple major playoff brackets were guards. You have Michael Jordan and John Stockton. So, I mean, Kobe, again, just because Kobe was there, he just wasn't consistent enough throughout his career. And that's testified to the fact that he wasn't even good enough to start his first 4 years. And also, yeah, he was injured like his last 3, but, he was still signing huge contracts and, making appearances there. So he just wasn't consistent enough statistically throughout his career to be impactful. And the Lakers were still winning 50-plus games without Kobe starting. In fact, he only started, I believe, 7 games total until 2000. Right around there or something. And so that shows that the Lakers were still put together. They weren't struggling, and he came into a great organization. But anyway, talk about Tim Duncan's impact, because it's far greater than Kobe Bryant's in every way you want to talk about. And the impact is defined by how well your team does with you as the addition. So without Tim Duncan, the year before he joined the team, the Spurs were dead last in defensive rating, dead last, 29th. The next year with Duncan, they were second. And incredibly, they stayed that way every single year of Duncan's career, where they would finish top 10 or better, outside of 2011, where they were 11th. And this is basically just with Tim Duncan, and the only really consistent pieces being, besides Duncan, were Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker, none of whom even are ever sniffed at defensive team selection. You really only see the likes of that. Of that kind of defensive impact and winning since Bill Russell. And so Tim Duncan, again, was leading from the front. He was leading the Spurs every year in like scoring, rebounds, blocks, and in 2003, he led them in points, rebounds, assists, and blocks, and becoming, I guess, one of only 7 players ever to lead their team in 5 major, or in at least 4 of the 5 major statistical categories throughout an entire championship run. And so, I mean, you're talking about Spurs were title contenders every single year. And so when you look at the impact there, and when Tim Duncan left, 2 years later, again, they were middling offensive and defensive teams after that. And so the next round, what I'll do is kind of close it up to really emphasize how these impacts are one-sided, and how Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan is really just a comparison alone, and Tim Duncan clears him when he goes to the real defensive impacts here.
2, 1.
So you're talking these defensive impacts, and you're talking these numbers with advanced analytics. I'm imagining what you're going to say next round. I don't know, maybe not. But some of the things that you said, that he wasn't even good enough in the first 4 years of his career. He was picked up as a teenager. He was, but in contrast to Tim Duncan, he was consistent, making all-star games throughout the majority of his career. Tim Duncan, over the last 7 years of his career, often wasn't even making all NBA or all defensive teams, but on or off. And Kobe was generally making both of those teams once he picked it up. And we're not talking who's better, we're talking who's greater. So, even if he had these better regular season records, what did it come down to? He might have been a contender, but he wasn't closing the deal. He didn't even make it to as many finals appearances as Kobe. And I'm going to describe this. Kobe was a better quality player than Tim Duncan. Quality is the degree which an object or entity satisfies a specified set of attributes or requirements. How this is largely identified is through the success someone helps bring to their team. So I talked about his individual numbers. I'm going to describe his quality contributions and how it gave them more playoff success in contrast to Tim Duncan. Especially since they played each other and were in the same conference, these numbers are more relevant. Both players won 5 championships. Kobe had one more appearance than Duncan with 7 to 6, as I had said. His finals appearances occurred from 2000 to 2010, meaning that an 11-year stretch that accounted for nearly 2/3 of all finals appearances during that time. Tim Duncan's team got switched up, not that Kobe's didn't, but that took about a 15-year period for Tim Duncan to win his second or his first and his last NBA championship. It really wasn't as potent or as great of a story. To include in that, Tim Duncan never went back-to-back in the championships. Kobe Bryant had won a three-peat and a back-to-back. Both are in rarefied air across the history of the NBA, which is great. Kobe defeated Tim Duncan 18-12 in the playoffs, which is a significant difference in the margins. And in addition, every year Kobe Bryant won an NBA championship, he was all NBA and an all defensive selection, something that Tim Duncan can't claim. Also, Kobe twice won the All-Star Game MVP when winning a championship, again, something Tim Duncan can't claim. And that's just showing his eminence, his quality, and his ability. And then additionally, Kobe Bryant won All-Star MVP, Finals MVP, the championship, first team All-NBA, and first team All-Defense all in the same season, 2009. Again, Duncan never had that variety in his accolades that to go across all the characteristics of greatness as it's defined, like Kobe did. He simply had more quality contributions to his team. Success.
All right, guys, I just really want to sum this up. We've already discussed how Tim Duncan really clears Kobe Bryant statistically all time. He has the better resume as far as accolades and achievements goes. That's really not the issue here. I just want to sum up their difference in team impact, which is what we're really talking about here. And that's how you define greatness. It always has been, not with all-star appearances as a teenager when you're not even starting. You're just wildly popular. That's why you get selected. That was kind of Kobe's early claim to fame because he sure wasn't winning Finals MVPs his first 3 years. In fact, he's the only top 10 player in league history that never won a Finals MVP during his first 3 title runs. Okay, not the case with anyone else that we want to talk about. But Tim was the man from the beginning, just like Larry Bird was in our earlier debate. Tim from the drop was the best. Kobe, again, wasn't even starting until year 4. They were still winning 60-plus games. And then what happened after their actual best player, Shaquille O'Neal, who was again, Kobe wasn't even the best player on his own team for basically the entire first half of his career. What happened when Shaq left? So the offensive and defensive rating went from top 10 to dead last in defensive rating when Shaq left the year after, and they went from 3rd in points per game to 12th. Okay, where's the impact from Kobe Bryant? Again, and that really didn't even change as Kobe is the main man. His stats went up, his scoring went up, his efficiency did go down, but those things didn't really change until you actually brought in the more efficient defensive anchors like Pau Gasol. You had to develop Andrew Bynum. You just signed a Ron Artest. The Lakers went from a 50-plus win team in the finals in 2004 to a 34-48 bottom feeder the minute Shaq left. Meanwhile, the Spurs never won less than 50 games in Duncan's entire career, excluding the lockout-shortened 99 season. And then, obviously, they went back to being a regular, normal middle-of-the-pack team the second he left. Okay, obviously, Tim Duncan wasn't making all-star teams or defensive or all NBA selections or the last few years of career, but he was still one of their best scorers. He was still arguably their best rebounder, their best defender, and he was still showing that impact night in and night out. And again, that's something that Kobe Bryant never did, especially if you look at their on-off things like that, like their team success with or without them on the floor. Tim Duncan stands alone as far as just the overall measurable team impact. We can't deny that enough or emphasize that enough. Tim Duncan was leading from the front. He was clearly the more impactful player in terms of stats, accolades, achievements, winning. As far as having to be the main man, he didn't have another fellow top 5 player to lead in scoring, to lead him rebounds, to be the defensive anchor. Kobe Bryant did for basically the first half of his career. Tim Duncan is more impactful, and it's not even close, really.
All right, so eminence is in the dictionary definition under greatness. That's what it means, not impact like what you're saying. Kobe was the closer when playing with Shaq. His stats were up during the time that he was winning those championships, and he was the closer also during those times. So it just doesn't really. I'm not entirely sure what you're meaning, as if because Shaq left, who was also a significant part of that team, that it went under. That's just what happens. And Tim Duncan just was on a team that they made greater moves. The team was greater. Duncan also didn't win Finals MVP after 2005. Tony Parker and Kawhi Leonard did. So I don't understand. And Kobe was impactful. He has great impact stats. I just didn't list them. He didn't win accolades, or in respect to Tim Duncan having better accolades and achievements. I'm going to explain some of the things that are not as great as Kobe's. So I'm going to explain eminence for you. Eminence is meaning of a position or prominence of superiority. It applies to Kobe Bryant with his awards, his reputation, and contributions to the game of basketball. They're referenced largely to include intangibles and prominence in the NBA at the time they played. So, firstly, Kobe was awarded 11 first-team All-NBAs versus Duncan's 10 first-team All-NBAs. To me, that's more consistent on top, which you've been driving home this entire time. That shows better consistency, that he was on top of the league more than Duncan in respect to All-NBAs. Also, for Kobe's All-Defense, he also won 9-time first-team All-NBA defense, tied for the most ever. And then Duncan only won 8, which is still fantastic, but that's still not as consistent and as impactful in these intangible awards as you were describing. And to make this clear, the first-team All-NBA award and All-Defense represents the considered best players by position for the season versus the other All-NBAs, which are consolation prizes in respect to that designation. Kobe Bryant was an All-Star 18 times to Duncan's 15. He's also the second in all-time All-Star appearances and went to a record 18 straight as a starter. So All-Stars showcase both popularity and skill set across the league, which is significant because that also shows the consistent of the eminence and the ability of a player, as by the definition of greatness. And then additionally, Kobe Bryant won the All-Star Game MVP a total of 4 times, which is a record, having the award named after him. He shared it with Bob Pettit, not the award, but the record. Tim Duncan won it once, and he was a co-MVP with Shaq in 2000. And he doesn't even have an award named after him. Again, not as eminent.
3, 2, 1.
I thought that was a fantastic debate. I think that Kobe Bryant, when you don't get into the analytics and you just look at the analytics, you don't look at the analytics face up and just put a ton of value on it. I think Kobe Bryant does have a strong case over Duncan to be a greater player with the ability, quality, and eminence as defined by the dictionary of what that word greatness means. And again, they're both fantastic players. Like you mentioned, it's a hard debate to have. I think that Kobe Bryant as an individual, again, not with the team, they both shuffled everything up. Losing Shaq was a terrible thing for the Lakers, as you were discussing. They didn't get much for him in return in respect to how he contributed to the team.
Like I said, I think obviously I'm a huge Kobe defender, and I've been doing that to a lot of degrees. The last week I've been for, but I think that Tim Duncan's a top 5 player for a reason, and Kobe isn't. It's like when you actually look at impact is more than just winning All-Star Game MVPs. That doesn't mean really anything. That's a popularity game. It doesn't impact the standings at all. Guys aren't even trying. What matters is like how you perform on the court, how your team does as a result, direct result of you. And Tim Duncan, I think, aside from Bill Russell, is really, I think, the second most impactful player in NBA history, especially when you look at, like I said earlier, when what happened when he joined that team. When you look at all their turnover through the years, really he was one of the only consistent pieces there, especially defensively. He was consistently always their best player. Kobe Bryant wasn't. And when you look at all the way up until his effect when he retired, like the Spurs were almost immediately worse across the board. And I mean, with Kobe, yeah, he was impactful, he was great, but like you said, he had like there was so much nuance with Kobe's career. I don't think it's hard for me to paint a picture of him being more impactful, especially when you look at how they had to rebuild when Shaq, their actual best player, left. They had to bring in other guys, which is fair, but it's tough for me to say that Kobe Bryant was the more impactful or better player. Maybe more flashy, but that's it.